Good Shabbos. Thanks for joining in. We'll begin in a moment. Maybe you have a tallis at home, and if not, and if you're interested, contact me and we can arrange perhaps for you to obtain a tallis. As we put the tallis on, we remind ourselves that each and every Jew is tied to each and every Jew elsewhere. The strings, the knots, tie us one to the other. And the bracha ends, Lehit atef batzitzit, Lehit atef batzitzit. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, Lehit atef batzitzit. There are two main Jewish garments, one the yarmulke and the other the talit. The yarmulke is fairly recent. And I wear yarmulkes that are color coordinated because I enjoy that. But the yarmulke is fairly recent. The yarmulke only becomes part of our Jewish tradition about 500 years ago. The act of covering one's head goes back thousands of years, but as clothing styles changed, people adopted different, over the course of many years, types of headdress and headgear. So the yarmulke that you're familiar with is only from, France and Germany in the 1500s. Part of that, Jewish people wore different types of headgear or headdress, just depending upon their own local custom. So local custom influenced the style of headdress, but what matters is that we cover one's head as a means of focusing our attention on what it means to be interacting with God, seeking an awareness of God by going inside ourselves. The talit has its origins 3,000 years ago, and of course it's found in the book of Numbers. Originally, Jewish people put these strings on their actual garments. As clothing styles changed, we no longer wore togas or four-quarter garments. Somebody very smart came up with the idea of creating an artificial garment, a four-corner garment which we superimposed upon ourselves. In effect, we've become, you might say, more religious or more spiritual, because in the origination point 3,000 years ago, having the strings on the corners of the garment was not associated with prayer. It was a demonstration of identity, that I am a member of the household of Israel. Nowadays, for the past 1,500 years wearing talit, this is associated with prayer and identity. In a moment, we'll turn to page 103, but first, Rising the early morning blessings, Birchot HaShachar on page 103 and 104. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lasek v'bina lahavchin ben yom u'ben layla. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, sha'asani b'tzalmo. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, sha'asani ben chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, sha'asani Yisrael. Baruch ato Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, pokeach ivrim. Baruch ato Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish arumim. At the top of 104, Baruch ato Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim. Baruch ato Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, zokef kefufim. Baruch ato Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch ato Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamechin mitzadeh gaver. Baruch ato Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, sha'asa likol tzarki. Baruch ato Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, ozer Yisrael bigvura. Baruch ato Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, oter Yisrael b'tif'ara. Baruch ato Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten layoif koach. This last blessing, noten layoif koach, calls out for a thought. Literally, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who gives strength to the exhausted. There are days when we all move a little bit more slowly. We're exhausted, we're tired. And when we're exhausted, we're tired, we talk about needing rest. Maybe energy, but we talk about needing rest. And there are many words for rest in Hebrew. Why doesn't this bracha say giving rest to the exhausted? Why does it say strength? And maybe this blessing is saying you're not always going to get the rest that you think you need. But in challenging times, if you reach inside yourself and remind yourself that you're connected to the purpose of the universe, you'll have the strength to go on even when you're exhausted. Sometimes we don't get exactly what we need or what we think we need, but we do get what is essential. Unenu hayom v'chol yom l'chenu chesed rachamim b'necha v'nechoru enu v'tigmelenu chasadim tovim baruch Adonai gomel chesed mo Yisrael. We are seated. And turning now to page 112, the Psalm for Shabbat herself. Mizmor shir liyom haShabbat tolodot l'Adonai ulezamer l'shimcha elyon ulezamer l'shimcha elyon lahagid b'boker chasdecha v'emunatcha b'leilot alei asor v'alei navel alei higayon bechinor Mizmor shir liyom haShabbat tolodot l'Adonai ulezamer l'shimcha elyon ulezamer l'shimcha elyon Ki simach Adonai b'folecha b'maaseh yadecha aranen ma'galo ma'asech Adonai ma'od amakum machshabotecha Mizmor shir liyom haShabbat tolodot l'Adonai ulezamer l'shimcha elyon ulezamer l'shimcha elyon. You gladden me with your deeds, Adonai, and I shall sing of your handiwork. How wonderful are your works, Adonai, how subtle your designs. The arrogant do not understand, the fool does not comprehend this. The wicked flourish like grass, and every evildoer blossoms, only to be destroyed forever. But you, Adonai, are exalted for all time. Surely your enemies, Adonai, surely your enemies will perish. All who commit evil will be scattered. As a wild bull raises up its horn, you raised my head high, anointed it with fresh oil. As my enemies gather against me, my gaze remains steady, for my ears listen and hear. The righteous flourish like the date palm, thrive like a cedar in Lebanon. Planted in the house of Adonai, they flourish in our God's courtyards. In old age they remain fruitful, still fresh and bountiful, proclaiming, Adonai is upright, my rock, in whom there is no flaw. The bottommost stanza found here in the Hebrew and also in the transliteration on the red ink. Tzadik Chatama Yifrach Kerez Balvanon Yiska Shetulim Bebeit Adonai Bechatrot Eloheinu Yafrichu Od Yanovon Beseva Teshenim Barananim Yiyu Lehagid Ki Ashar Adonai Tzuri V'lo Avlatabo. Baruch Shemar, found on page 122. Baruch Shamar v'haya ha'olam Baruch Hu Baruch Oseh v'reshit Baruch Omer v'oseh Baruch Gozer u'mekayim Baruch merachem al haaretz Baruch merachem al habriot Baruch mishalem sachar tov lireov Baruch chaylod v'kayom lo netzach Baruch podeh u'matzil Baruch Shemo, the singular one who gives life to the world, the sovereign who is praised and glorified forever and ever. This is your great name. Baruch atah Adonai, sovereign, celebrated with songs of praise. Yachid Cheho Olamim, Melech Mishabach U'Mefawar, Adei Ad Shemo HaGadol, Baruch atah Adonai, Melech Molavati Ishbachot. Pardon me. And now we turn to Ashrei on page 136. Ashrei, as I mentioned before, is an alphabetical acrostic. Every letter of the alphabet is presented here in sequence, each line, the next and the next, and so on. And perhaps long before we had printed prayer books, the Ashrei captured the attention of our ancestors because it was an alphabetical arrangement. And frankly, it would have been fairly easy to remember because they were just going along the lines in their heads, thinking lines, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, and so on. The Ashrei, page 136. Ashrei Yashvei Beitacha Od Yalucha Selo Ashreyam Shekocholo Ashreyam Sharoi Elohov Tehillah David Aromim Chalahai HaMelech Va'avarcha Shimcha Leolam Voed B'chol Yom Avarcheko V'halala Shimcha Leolam Voed Gadol Arnoi Malmod, Vligdulato en Cheker, Dor Lador Yeshabach Masecha, Ugvuratecha Yagidu, Hadar Kavod Hodecha, V'divrei Niflotecha Asicha, Ve'ezuz Norotecha Yomero, Gudulatecha Asapreno, Zecherav Tuvachayabiu, Vitzid Katachayiranenu, Chanun Rachum Adonai, Erech Alpine Mugdol Chassid, Tov Adonai Lakol, Rachamov Alkol Ma'asov, Yoduchanoi Kol Masecha, V'chassidecha Yevarchucha, Kavod Malchutcha Yomero, U'Gvoratcha Yedaberu, Lodia Libnei Hadam Gvurotav, U'Chavod Hadar Malchuto, Malchutcha Malchut Kol Olamim, U'Memshaltecha B'chol Dor Vador, Somer Charon L'Chol Hanoflim, V'Zokef L'Chol Hakfufim, Enei Chol Elecha Yesaberu, V'Ata Noten Lahem Et Achlam B'Ito, Poteach Et Yodecha, U'Maspia L'Chol Charatzon, Tzadik Adonai B'Chol Drachov, V'Chasid B'Chol Ma'asov, Karov Adonai L'Chol Korov, L'Chol Asher Kra'u V'Emet, Ritzon Yerev Ya'aseh, V'Yet Shavatam Yishma V'Yoshiem, Shomer Adonai Et Kol Ohavav, V'Et Kol Rashaim Yashmin, Tilat Adonai Yidaber Pi, V'Vorech Kabasar Shem Kachal Elam Voed, V'Anachnu Nevarech Yah Me'ata V'Yad Olam, Hallelujah. And on page 141, at the top of the page. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la ya la la la, ya la la la, ya la la ya la la la, ya la la la, hallelujah 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 el bekacho hallelujah berkia uzo hallelujah vigvaratav hallelujah karov gulo ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 hallelujah b'tek hashofar hallelujah b'neva b'chinor hallelujah b'tov u'machol hallelujah b'minim v'ugav ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 hallelujah b'tziltzilei shema hallelujah b'tziltzilei trua kol anshama taloyah hallelujah ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la ya la 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 ya la la la. We can all agree on one thing, that breath is essential for life. The next step from this Psalm's point of view is that singing is essential for life. The next step from that is that singing together to get closer to a sense of God is essential as well. On page 142, the left-hand side, in the marginal note, there's a text, changed his name to Abraham. It's the first paragraph only of that little marginal note. Let's read it slowly. According to the Babylonian Talmud, Abraham's name was changed because in the beginning he was a leader of Aram, in parentheses, Avram, a leader of the people of Aram. And at the end, he was a leader of the whole world. Avraham equals Av Hamon, father of multitudes, found in the Torah. The ancient rabbis taught that except when directly quoting scripture, it is expressly forbidden to refer to Abraham by his former name. His name was Avram, a father, a leader of a people named Aram in Syria, and later his name Avraham, Abraham, came to be the father of a great many nations. And we don't want to, you might say, insult the reputation of Abraham, a father of a great many nations, by pointing out that once he was lesser than a father of a great many nations. And obviously he died 3,800 years ago. There's no way that he would be insulted by a comment that we make today. Number one, we ascribe our own lives to a man who changed his viewpoint. Avram became Avraham. But number two, perhaps even more importantly, it's so important to respect the dignity of a person that even long after he or she has died, we have to make an effort to speak only respectfully of that person. And that would apply not only to Abraham, but to everyone. Page 145. Nishmat kol chaim tevarech et shimcha Adonai Eloheinu Ruach kavasar tifaer Adonai matvael Mashiach Poda matu tukam and the top of page 147, the first red arrow. Shochenan maram vekadosh shemo vechatuv rananu tzadikim baronoi leisharim navam tehillah befi yesharim tit halal uvedivrei tzadikim tit barach uvolshon chasidim tit romam uvekerev kiddushim tit kadash uvamakalot rivavot amcha beit Yisrael. Lohodo, lahalel, l'shabech, lefaer, l'rameim, lahader, l'brech lalekales. Orkol l'rishor v'tish b'chot, David ben Yishai, Avdecha meshichecha, Yishtabach shimcha, la'ad malkeinu, ha'el ha'melech, ha'gadol v'ha'kadosh, Bashamayim uvaretz ki lecha na'eh Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avot avotenu v'imotenu, shir u'shvacha, halel v'zimra, ozu memshala, netzach gedula u'gvura, tehila v'tiferet, kedusha u'malchut, brachot v'araot me'ata v'ad olam, Baruch atah Adonai, El melech gadol v'tishbachot, El hodot Adonai niflot, Habocher b'shirei zimra, Melech elchei olamim. We rise, the opening bracha on page 150. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam, yotzer or vorech choshech, oseh shalom, uvorei et hakol. Baruch atah Adonai, our God, sovereign of time and space, forming light and creating darkness, bringing harmony while creating all. As we are seated, turning to page 151, while creating all, this is a poem speaking of the different elements of creation. It's known as El Adon. Remember the word Adon, which we speak of often? Adon is at the center of the name Adonai. Adonai is God's name. But if you were to parse it, Adonai literally means my God, or my Lord, or my Master. The Jewish name for God indicates a personal relationship with God. How you understand God when you say my is different than how you understand God when you say my, and how I understand God when I say my. Coming back out of that, we're on page 151, Adon, Lord, Master of all. El Adon al kol ha'ma'asim, baruch u'baruch, b'fi kol neshama, gadlo v'tuvo, ha'malei olam, da'at u'tvuna, sov v'imoto, ha'mit ga'el chayot ha'kodesh, b'nei rabachavot al ha'merkava, zechot u'mishor lifnei chiso, chesed v'rachamim lifnei chavodo, tovim oro, Shabara Eloheinu Yitzaram Bidat Bavina Uvaskel Koach Gvura Natan Bahem Liot Moshlim Bekerev Tevel Maleim Ziv Fikim Nogach Noezivam Bachololam Semechim Betseitam Visasim Bavoam Osim Biem Aritzon Konam Per Bachavo Nonim Lishmo Tzahalavarina lezecher malchuto kara lashemesh vayizrach ora v'hitkin tzurat halvana shevach no nimlo kol tzavamaram tiveret gedula serafim v'yofanim v'chayot hakodesh yadai dai 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 yadai dai 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 ya dai 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 ya dai 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 ya dai 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 hey ya dai 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 ya dai 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 hey ya dai 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 dai. Bottom of page 153, thinking about what we said on the previous page, which talks about at the top of that previous page, God creating everything. Look at the bottom of 153. It's the last three lines, the little red arrow. Continuing the theme of creating everything. In God's goodness, the work of creation is renewed each day, as the psalmist declared, quote marks, now we're quoting a phrase from the Psalms, thank the creator of the great lights, for God's love is everlasting, end quote. Now we're back into this little prayer, which extends from the previous page, creating everything. Cause a new light to shine on Zion, and may we all soon be worthy of its illumination. Light is part of creation, but now we've got to stop And look at this, cause a new light to shine on Zion. We're not actually talking about wattage, what we call visible light. We're talking about a sense of safety and protection and preservation and blessing and closeness with God. That's what we're speaking about. And that too is part of the everything of creation. Baruch Atah Yotzer Hamorot. On page 154, the first paragraph on the English side. You've loved us deeply, Adonai, our God, and showered us with boundless compassion. Avinu Malkeinu, for the sake of our ancestors who trusted in you, and to whom you taught the laws of life, so may you be gracious to us and instruct us. Kind Creator, have compassion for us. Open our hearts so that we may understand, and with love, discern, hear, and study. Observe, perform, and fulfill all the teachings of your Torah with love. Enlighten our eyes with your Torah. Attach our hearts to your mitzvot. Unify our hearts to love and revere your name, so that we never lose hope. As we trust in your great, holy, awe-inspiring name, we will delight and rejoice in your deliverance. The bottom stands on the Hebrew side. V'havienu l'shalom me'arba kanfot haaretz v'tulichenu komemiyot le'artzenu ki el poel yeshuot ata uvanu v'charta mikolam v'lashon v'keraftan l'shimcha hagadol selah be'emet l'hodot l'cha ol yachedcha be'ahava Baruch atah Adonai Habocher b'amo Yisrael b'yahava. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'otecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha V'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha b'veitecha u'v'lechtecha v'derech u'v'shachbecha v'kumecha u'kishartam liot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha u'ktavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'v'sharecha. The top paragraph on 156 in silence. The middle of 156. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor taber el bnei Yisrael v'marta aleim v'asu lahem tzitzit al kanfei vigdeihem l'dorotam v'natnu al tzitzit hakanaf b'til techelet v'yalachem l'tzitzit Uritem oto, uschartem et kol mitzvot Adonai, vasitem otam, v'lo taturo, acharei levavchem, v'acharei enechem, asher atem zonim achareihem, l'man tizkaru, vasitem et kol mitzvotai, v'yitem kedoshim le'elohechem, Ani Elohechem, Asher Tzeti Yatchem Eretz Mitzrayim, Liot Lachem LeElohim, Ani Adonai Elohechem, Adonai Elohechem, Emet. The center of page 157 on the English side. That main central paragraph with a little red arrow. Truly, you are Adonai, our God, and the God of our ancestors, our sovereign and our ancestors' sovereign, our Redeemer and our ancestors' Redeemer. You are our Creator and the rock of our deliverance, our Redeemer and help. So you are known throughout time, for there's no God but you. And stop for a moment and look at the focus on our role as being a descendant of our ancestors. And ask yourself, how often when you go about your daily business do you see yourself as a descendant of Sarah and Abraham, Rebecca and Isaac, Rachel, Leah, and Jacob, and for that matter, Moses and Miriam, and so on. And what we also tend to forget is that each one of us is an ancestor. And just as the Siddur is saying, oh God, you are the sovereign and the Redeemer of the ancestors, so too God is ours. How will we transmit our sense of connection to God to the generations yet to come? Page 158. Tehilot le'el elyon baruch hu u'mvorach Moshe u'Miriam u'bnei Yisrael l'cha'anu shira b'simcha rabba v'yamru chulam mi chamocha p'elim Adonai mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh norati lot osef ele shira chadasha shibchu geulim l'shimcha osefat hayam yachad kulam hodu v'imlichu v'yamro Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed Tzor Yisrael Kuma be'ezrat Yisrael U'padech inumecha Yehuda v'Yisrael Go aleinu Adonai tzvot shemo Kiddush Yisrael. We begin aloud on pages 159 and 160 in the Hebrew, and thereafter we continue in silence for a few silent moments of prayer, concluded on page 166, beginning aloud in the Hebrew 159, 160. And if your Hebrew is a little rusty and you're interested in the transliteration, if you have the Siddur, the very last page of our Siddur, which is 466, is the phonetic of 159 and 160, which will begin in just a moment. 3 small steps backwards. Adonai, Sivatai, Tiftach, Ufi, Hagi, Tilatecha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu Elohei Abraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor V'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'Konei HaKol V'Zocher Chasdei Avot V'Imahot U'Mevi Goel Livnei B'neihem L'man Shemo B'Yavah Melech Ozer U'Foket U'Moshiach U'Magen Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham U'Foket Sarah Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai Mechaye Meitim Atah Rav L'Hoshia Mashiva Ruach U'Merit Hagashem Mechalkel Chayim B'Chesed Mechaye Meitim B'Rachamim Rabim Somech Noflim V'Rofeh Cholim O Matir Asurim O Mekayem Emunato Lishenei Afar Micha Mocha Bal Gevurot Omedo Melach Melech Memit O Mechaye O Matmeach Yeshua Pneuman Atah Lachayot Meitim Baruch Atah Adonai Mechaye HaMeitim. In a moment, those able are invited to stand for page 168, but first I want to stop for just a moment. This is the Vayhi being saw when the ark is opened, and in just about a minute we'll take the Torah out. But there's an introductory line, it's in the center of page 168. Compassionate Creator, may be will that Zion flourish. Flourish means to grow like a beautiful flower. Build the walls of Jerusalem. Why do we need walls? We need walls for protection. You probably recognize the Kotel, which is the most famous of all Jewish sites. It's 2,000 years old. And below ground level, far below ground level, is the foundation, which goes back to the first temple, the originating stones 3,000 years old. And when people go to Israel, if they so choose to go to Jerusalem, they stand and they pray at the Kotel, because it's the oldest thing we have. It takes us back to our very beginning. The first time that I walked up to the Kotel Plaza, I turned a corner and I went, oh. Because in my mind's eye, I had expected something like the Empire State Building. It's fairly short. I don't know, 40 feet? It's not an enormous, colossal structure, but it's ours. What does it mean to seek a sense of protection based upon something that's not entirely imposing? What does that mean? It means to know who you are and how you're connected to something much greater than yourself. To see yourself as part of the mortar, part of the structure of the stones that were fashioned and handed down to us and still remain. The walls aren't intended to prevent great military aggression. The walls are intended for you and me to know that we are essential. Each one of us is a brick. Each one of us is a component. That's what we're saying in just a minute as we rise to open the ark. That each one of us contributes to the enduring permanence of what it means to be Jewish. In the middle of page 168, Av HaRachamim. Av HaRachamim, Heitiv Avirtzoncha et Shion. Tivnei Chomot Yerushalayim. Tivnei Chomot Yerushalayim. Ki v'cha levad batachnu. Melech el ram v'nisa. Adon Olamim. If able, we rise. Page 168. Vayehi bin Aharon vayomer Moshe Kuma Adonai ve'afutzu oevecha ve'anusu misanecha mipanecha ki mitzion tetzei Torah ki mitzion tetzei Torah u'davar Adonai mirushalayim Shenatan Torah, Torah. Baruch Shenatan Torah, Torah. La'amo Yisrael B'kedushato. Ribono Shel Olam, it appears before our very eyes that soon war will erupt, and a leader bent on attack of a smaller, weaker country will unleash great forces. Almighty God, for you have fashioned the entire universe. Protect the innocents from an onslaught that may very well be coming just in a matter of hours. Safeguard them, for they are your children. Keep them as protected as possible. And if in any way it is possible, enter the heart of a man who is stubborn and consumed by ego and thirst for power, and turn his heart just one little bit, so that perhaps needless loss of life will actually be averted. Hear this prayer and all the prayers of those throughout Ukraine and those elsewhere. And now we all say the Shema on page 171.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo. Gadol Adonai Tin Ramama Shmo Yachdav. L'cha Adonai hagedula v'hagevura v'tiferet v'hanetzach v'hahod ki chol b'shamayim u'va'aretz ki chol b'shamayim u'va'aretz. Adonai hamamlacha v'minaseh l'chol rosh romemo romemo Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavo la'adam raglov kadoshu romemo romemo Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavo lehar kodsho ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. And as we're seated, we have the Chumash, the red book, the Torah in book form. It's called the Chumash or a Chumash. And we'll be turning to the Chumash to Gadiel. We'll be turning to the Chumash in just a moment. And those joining in at home, if you have a Chumash, we'll be on page 541. If you don't have a Chumash at home, you have a Tanakh. We're in Exodus chapter number 34, Exodus 34, verse 4, Exodus 34, verse 4. And we here in Shul are on page 541 in the Chumash. Before we study Torah, just a short note. This parsha, as you see at the top of the page, is called Ki Tisa. And Ki Tisa is very famous because Ki Tisa is the parsha that contains two different sets, you might say, of the tablets of the great words. The first set, according to this Torah reading, is a result of God's own handiwork. Imagine if God were to paint a painting for you and were to present it to you. How exciting that would be. It'd be literally the masterpiece of all masterpieces. Imagine if God were to sculpt something for your own pleasure, for your own edification. It would be exceptional. Of course, literally unique. The first set of plaques is described as being carved by God. Moses is up on the mountain, he's about to take them down, and the golden calf debacle ensues. Moses comes down, sees the golden calf, and Moses shatters the first set. He shatters the most perfect of all fabrications. And unfortunately, there's an eruption of, you would say, a battle. And thousands of people who are the ringleaders of this enterprise die. And there's a great brouhaha and screaming and weeping. And then Moses goes back up the mountain and he begs and he pleads and he talks with God. And God says, all right, I won't destroy everyone, but you make the second set. And I see a number of elements here. So according to this tradition, it's right here on page 540, verse 4. Moses carves the second set, and he brings that set down. First, there may be an element of disappointment on the part of God, because I gave you this, and you broke something that's literally a masterpiece. But there may also be an awakening of realization and awareness, because every single one of us is prone to mistake, and every single one of us is imperfect, and nothing perfect can reside in this world. There are far too many limits. And so Moses, a man who is now moving a little bit more slowly than some of us, because according to tradition he's 80 years old, and Moses, a man who has a speech impediment of some type, chisels a set of stone plaques and words inscribed therein. And Moses brings those plaques down. And they're touched by an imperfect man, as imperfect as you and me, with the message and the idea that comes from the transcendent of all. And it's that set of tablets that remains part of our Jewish lives for 1,000 years. Not the perfect one, which I think would not be able to physically dwell within our world. Those are shattered. It's the second set, which is the aspiration for perfection by somebody who is flawed. The second set of plaques is the embodiment of the aspiration for perfection by someone who is flawed. And that's the set that sits in the ark, journeys with the Israelites for centuries, eventually finds its way into the first temple and the second temple, and then is lost to history. And maybe someday Indiana Jones will find it. Who knows? But it's the second set, which is the struggle to do as best as we possibly can, recognizing we're never quite going to make it. That's the set that's been part of our history. That's the set that undergirds all civilization throughout the world. That's my preliminary comment. And now a little bit of a smiley story. you may be able to see that we have two plaques here. They're fairly heavy, so I'm only carrying one at a time. About 22 years ago, an acquaintance came to me. He's a Christian man, and he wanted to fabricate a set of the plaques. He has a fabrication shop. And so in the days long before computers, I took a stencil and I stenciled the Hebrew letters of the Big Ten on paper, I think. I can't remember. And I gave it to him, and he fabricated, and he got these gold letters, and he made a set of the plaques. And months later, he showed up at our door, and he said, I made you something. I didn't know his. He made two sets, one for himself and one for me. And so this is my very own set of the Big Ten. And I thought, thank you very much. And then he left. I was excited. And then I thought, what am I going to do with these? I'm not going to take them home. They're too big to put in the kitchen. Then I thought, I know. I'll put them in the ark. Where do you put a plaque? I put them in the ark. So these are in the small ark in the small chapel. They have been for the past 20 some odd years. And it's an expression of love and honor and affection by this gentleman who cared enough for our synagogue to fabricate in the 20th century a set of plaques. And yet, as you can see, it's man-made. That's where we are in our lives as people. How do we bring something of exceptional spiritual power into our daily lives, knowing we're going to mess up tomorrow? We do the very best we can. Thank you, David. Maybe we can relocate the original plaques? Oh, okay. Where'd you like them?
Oh, I'm looking around. I don't know off the top of my head, but they're beautiful and they should be seen by the congregation.
We can do that. We can figure out something. Until we figure out where, I need a few good ideas because I don't have enough good ideas.
On the front of it,
We got them in front of the building.
somewhere on the inside.
We'll work on it. We'll work on it. Thank you. Side note, and this is a pet peeve of mine, people don't know this, but in the ancient Jewish tradition, the plaques were rectangular. At some point in medieval ages in Europe, somebody came with the idea of curving the top, and it caught on. Since we're talking medieval Europe, what we really mean, we're talking about Christian artists or sculptors for some reason. And so the familiar tradition that you and I and all the people who are recipients of the Anglo-European tradition understand and recognize as being is flawed as well. So it's ironic and beautiful that the front of our building is rectangular, you might say, and the design etched into the glass of the front doors is reminiscent of that same shape. That's closer to the original Jewish understanding of what the plaques look like. So here we are. We're on page 541, verse number 4. And in response to Moses' carving of the plaques, look what happens. It's verse number 5. And God descended within cloud and was present there, and God called forth the name, quote marks, God. God announced God's own name. It's verse number 5, verse 6, and God passed by, and God proclaimed God's own name. What does it mean for God to be present? Gosh, folks, if I could answer that question, I can't tell you what that means. Again, there are going to be 1,000 occasions when we feel that God is present, and every one of them is going to be different, and every one of them is going to be far beyond our ability to put into words. But in this context, when God came forth as El Rahum V'Chanun, compassionate and filled with grace, Erech Hapaim, very, very patient, Rav Chesed, filled with Chesed, kindness, Ve'emes, and truth, Noter Chesed La'alfim, dispensing kindness to thousands, and Nosei Avon V'Feshev V'Chata'ah, still bearing and paying attention to transgression and sin when you and I mess up, and on occasion remitting those sins, on occasion not remitting those sins, poked avon avot, holding on to the sin of ancestors to the third and fourth and fifth generations. Third and fourth generations, I should say. And what does that mean? If God is patient and kind and loving and dispensing justice and kindness for 1,000 generations, but also paying attention to transgression for 3 and 4 generations, that's not a visible experience or understanding of God. That's a spiritual understanding of God. So the name of God comes forth in how you and I interact with God as a result of our conduct. Vayipsol shenei luchot avanim karishanim vayishkem Moshe b'boker vayal har Sinai kasher tivarnoi oto v'yikav yiro shnei luchot avanim vayirid Adonai b'anan v'yitzev Mosham vayikra v'shem Adonai vayavor Adonai apanav vayikra Adonai Adonai el rachum v'chanun erech hapaim rav chesed be'emet Noter chesed l'alafim, nosei avon, v'feshev v'chata v'nakeh, lo yinakeh, pokei avon avot, al banim v'al banim, al shleishim v'arbeim, v'yamer Moshe v'yikod artza, v'yishtachu. And then on page 542, it's verse number 10. Verse 10, he said, I hereby make a covenant before all your people. I will work such wonders as have not been wrought on all the earth or in any nation, and all the people who are with you shall see how awesome are the Lord's deeds, which I will perform for you. Moses has this experience that's only his. He's on a mountain, having shattered the first plaques, and now he carves his own set, and he experiences God in a way that you and I don't understand and haven't experienced. And then God says, but Moses, you're not alone in having a relationship with God. Everyone is going to have a relationship with God. And the term that's used is brit, covenant. And we know that term because it comes to us from the time of Abraham and Sarah. And so Moses becomes, you might say, a witness to the presentation that God is connected to all of us. Moses becomes a witness to the presentation that God is connected to all of us. That might be Moses' greatest element of performance, that he's a witness to God's being connected to everyone. Moses doesn't seek the uniqueness of saying, God's only mine. Moses recognizes that Everyone in the nation needs to have his or her own private relationship with God, but as a shared community sense of identity. So that's Moses, and now we're going to jump just a little bit, and we're going to jump to page 548, which is the Haftorah for today. If you're at home and you have a Tanakh, it's the first book of Kings, chapter 18, 1 Kings chapter 18, and I'm going to summarize a little bit. And we're going to wind up here on page 550, verse number 25. The summary is as follows. We're now dealing with a man named Elijah, and you know Elijah because he comes to your home every so often. When does Elijah come into your homes? Passover, exactly right. We open the door, and Eliyahu Hanavi comes in, exactly right. And Elijah also comes another time if we're so inclined. Havdalah. Elijah comes every Havdalah. He comes at Shabbat, at the end of Shabbos, at Havdalah, and he comes on Passover. So that's Elijah. This is about 2,700 years ago. There is a Jewish king. His name is Ahab. Yeah, he's ours, Ahab. And Ahab is corrupt and not interested in what we call religious identity. And he puts out warrants for arrest of and execution of Jewish leaders. And he sets up fake priestly worship leaders to a cult known as Baal, a Canaanite religious practice. This is sponsored by the Israelite crown. The throne, the monarchy, is sponsoring idol worship. And Elijah comes to this scene and he says, we're going to have a face-off. In this corner, 450 priests to Baal, and then I'm over here in this corner. I love this scene. And 450 priests of Baal jump up and down, and they're screaming and they're shouting, oh Baal, listen to us. Come down, light up an animal that's on this altar, consume it, and show that you are the power of the universe. Nothing happens. And there's this great line. It's on page 550, verse number 26. Oh Baal, answer us. Verse 27, when noon came, Elijah mocked him, saying, shout louder. After all, he's a god, but maybe he's in conversation. Maybe he's running late. Maybe he's on a journey. Maybe he's asleep. You have to wake him up. Shout louder for Baal to pay attention. I love that part. By the way, who said there's no sense of humor in the Bible? I think there's sense of humor here. And it's just hysterical. And they're shouting and they're cutting themselves, and Baal's not doing anything. And then Elijah says, I'm going to call out to God. And he builds an altar, puts an animal on the altar, and says, drench it with water. And they pour buckets and buckets of water upon this animal. Oh God, please answer me. Please answer us. And fire comes down from the sky, and zap consumes the animal and dries up all the water. And it's on page 551. It's the very last line. It's verse 39. When the people of Israel in Elijah's time saw this, all the people flung themselves on their faces and cried out, Adonai hu Elohim. God alone is God. The Lord alone is God. The reason that this Haftorah is here is that in the Torah reading, we're talking about the golden calf episode, faithlessness by the people of Israel. And in the time of Elijah, which is about 500 years after Moses, we have the faithlessness by the people worshiping with this Baal cult. That's the connection point. The people finally come to their senses and say, there has to be something grander than an item that you and I fabricate. It's just a piece of metal. That's the bell, the rimon. Just a piece of metal. This is just a piece of wood. Can you really expect that something tangible is going to be a major effective force in your life? Do you really think that's possible? That's what is happening within the golden calf episode during the time of Moses and the Baal Elijah face-off. 500 years later. And the people in the time of the Haftorah come to their senses and they say, there's only God, which is immaterial and spiritual. Adonai hu Elohim. And here's the question. When do we as Jews quote that phrase, Adonai hu Elohim? It's fairly famous. The end of Yom Kippur, the very end of the Yom Kippur service, just had the shofar. We're about to go get our food. The very last thing we do is we say this phrase, God is God. And that brings us into the entirety of the brand new year, saying there's only one way that you and I are going to live our lives, in concert with belief and behavior. At this point, we offer our prayer of healing for those who are ill within our community and beyond. And if you at home wish to include the name of someone, we ask you to do so, and we as well here mention the names of our loved ones. מי שבירך אותנו אברהם ונשוא רחל, ויברך רבי כל החולים האלה, וזה כולל את נברונית בת עליזה, ינטה בת גישה, חנה שרה בפשליה, אברהם יהודה בן גישה, אלליה בת אביבה, לקלודיה תומאס, רובן מאיר, Sprinza bat Bashi, Bashi bat Sprinza, Miriam bat Bashi, Shimon Shmuel ben Eliyahu, Shmuel ben Chava, George Patinos, Wendy Fassman, Tom Bastoni, Hannah bat Meredith, Billy Singleton, Yaakov ben Leora, Bruce Kahn, Dov ben Zalman, Karniach Chaya bat Sarimenu, Pat Cockrell, David Shlomo ben Tovanacham, Anna Moret, Shira Avot bat Sarah, Rivka bat Chavshalivsha, Tovalea bat Freda, Tom McCarthy, Mekulam Shniskriyim, Hasha, was Amen. Almighty God, as you have blessed our mothers and our fathers, reach out with that same touch, that identical manner of blessing to all those who are ill, all those who are in need of support and revitalization. Bring your blessings of love, of gentle power, of grace and of healing upon all those known to us, all those kept in our hearts, and all those known to you. Help them to stand up this day and the days yet to be. Assist them to walk forward, making this next week an opportunity of growth, an opportunity of experiencing blessing and healing and vitality. Remove pain and difficulty and place within them of the body and of the spirit confidence, hope, and strength. Let them feel and know every single day they are loved and remembered. Above all, grant to all of our people peace. And we all say, Amen. We rise in the Siddur, a prayer for our country on page 177. It's the center and the bottom stanzas on page 177. On the English side in our Siddur, 177. Adonai, God whose spirit is in all creatures, we pray that your spirit be awakened within all the inhabitants of our land. Uproot from our hearts hatred and malice, jealousy and strife. Plant love and companionship, peace and friendship among the many peoples and faiths who dwell in our nation. Grant us the knowledge to judge justly, the wisdom to act with compassion, and the understanding and courage to root out poverty from our land. May it be your will that our land be a blessing to all who dwell on earth, and may you cause all peoples to dwell in friendship and freedom. Speedily fulfill the vision of your prophets. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. For all of them, from the least of them to the greatest, shall know me. And let us say, Amen. Our prayer for Israel on page 178. Avinu Shabbat Tzur Yisrael v'Goalo, Barech et Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu. Avinu Shabbat stronghold and redeemer of the people Israel, bless the state of Israel, the beginning of our redemption. Shield it with your love, spread over it the shelter of your peace. Guide its leaders and advisors with your light and your truth. Help them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land. Deliver them, crown their efforts with triumph. Bless the land with peace and its inhabitants with lasting joy. And let us say, Amen. Lifting the Torah. Leslie, do you want to address the Torah? V'zot ha'Torah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai b'yad Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Take one for Stan.
Is it one showed yet?
Not
It's
yet.
been a while. Okay.
Eitz Chaim in the Siddur on page 184. Page 184, Eitz Chaim. Eitz Chaim hi l'machazikim ba v'tomcheha me'ushar deracheha darchei noam v'chol netivoteha shalom. Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva Chodesh Chodesh Yomenu Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. Please remain standing, the Aleinu on page 205. Aleinu leshabeach ladon hakol, latet gedula liotzer breshit, shelo asanu kugoye haratzot, velo samanu kemishpachot adama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonam, vanachnu korim, umishtachavim umodim, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shehu Noteh Shamayim v'Yosei Haaretz, Umoshav Yekaro b'Shamayim imimal, U'Shchinatu zo, B'Govhei Miromim, Hu Eloheinu en od, Emet Malkeinu efezulato, Kakatu b'Torato, V'yadata yom v'shebota el levavecha, Ki Adonai huwa Elohim, B'Shamayim mimal, V'al haaretz mitachat ein od. Kakatu b'Toratecha, Adonai yimloch le'olam v'ed, v'ne'emar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu, yiyeh Adonai echad, U'Shemo echad. In a moment, Mourner's Kaddish on page 207. Is that on?
You read the name.
Is that on?
I think you're on.
Yeah, please. On page 207, on this Shabbat we remember with great love Annie M. Rips, Miriam Jett, Chenya Friedberger, Benjamin J. Mitchell, Samuel Brown, Celia Plotka, David L. Casper, Max Mendel Muchnick, Eddie Unger, Bertha Cohen, Philip Plotka, Jacob Elias, Rosalie Ross, Judge Alan Lerner, remembering our recent losses, Molly Gross, Lizzie Steedman, Anthony Arnold. Are there any other names to mention today? And perhaps those at home, I'm mentioning a name as well. Those wishing to recite Kaddish are invited to rise at this time. Kaddish on page 207.
Yikadal v'yikadash shemei rabbah.
Amen.
Ba'alma divrei hirote v'yamlik malhute v'hayon v'yomehon v'haye dekol bet Yisrael ba'gala u'zman kariv v'imru amen.
Amen. Yehei shmei rabba mivarach la'olam olamei olmaya.
Yiparak v'yishtabah v'yipor v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal shmei dekudusha
Brichu.
le'ela min kol v'rhata Vishirata, Tushbahata, Vinehemata, Damiram Biamal, Vimru.
Amen.
Yehe, Shlama, Rava, Minshemaya, Vahayim, Aleinu, Ve'akol Yisrael, Vimru.
Amen.
Ose Shalom Bimramav, Huya Ase Shalom, Aleinu, Ve'akol Yisrael, Vimru. Amen.
Amen. Remember again when we say the Imru Amen, everybody says Amen. Everybody pays attention. Everybody pays attention to who's saying Kaddish. Everybody pay attention to who has been marked by loss. Everybody pay attention to who needs to be heard and attended. That's really the essence of the Kaddish. That when people are hurting, they can't be left alone. When we all hurt, we need to be together. And people need to express their support and their love and their friendship and their concern. That's Kaddish. We'll conclude in just a moment. Reminders again, of course, tonight we've got a miniature concert. It's Havdalah on Zoom at 7 o'clock. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, ask me afterwards. I'll explain how to get on to the concert. But Yehuda, who's been doing guitar for us now for about 7-8 years, is part of the group, as are 2 other song leaders and 2 cantors. And it's a lovely program. It's every Saturday night at 7 o'clock on Zoom. Monday is Tanakh at Zoom at noon. Tuesday is Adult Hebrew at 3 on Zoom. And Tuesday is 5 o'clock. Spirit Discussion is on Zoom. George Washington, what do we Jews know of him and how do we Jews feel about him? George Washington, because it is Washington's birthday, approximately. So that's coming up. That's on Tuesday on Zoom. And I think we'll stop the announcements. We'll turn to page 211. For the Adon Olam on page 211, and afterwards Kiddush and Hamotzi. We have wine and grape juice and challah in the back of our sanctuary, and hopefully those joining in at home will also be making Kiddush with us with wine and challah. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yetzir Nivra Li'etz Nasa V'cheptza Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra Azai Melech Shemo Nikra V'yacharei Kichlot HaKol Lavado Yimloch Nora V'hu Hayah V'hu hoveh, v'hu yiyeh b'tifara, v'hu yiyeh b'tifara, v'hu echad, v'yein sheni, laham shilo, lahachbira, b'li reshit, b'li tachlit, v'lo ha'oz v'hamisra, v'lo ha'oz v'hamisra, v'hu eli, v'chai go'ali, v'tzur chevli, b'yet tzara, v'hu nisi, u'manosli, menat kosi, b'yom ekra, menat kosi, b'yom ekra, b'yado avkid ruchi, b'yet ishan, v'yayira, v'im ruchi geviyati, Adonai li v'lo ira, Adonai li v'lo ira. Good Shabbos, and again we have wine and juice and challah here, and people are invited to step to the back of the sanctuary for Kiddush, for wine, grape juice and challah, and we have some up here as well. Thank you, sir. So Kiddush means sanctification. It's the act of sanctification. By the way, folks, we're not making wine holy. That might be the other guys, not us. We don't make wine holy. We don't make bread holy. God makes all the food groups in the universe. Kiddush means to make us attuned that life can be holy. That's what Kiddush is all about. You might think of it as making a toast to God. That's what Kiddush is all about.
Vishanru v'nei Israel et ha-Shabbat.
Asot et ha-Shabbat l'doratam brit olam beini uvein bnei Yisrael oti liolam ki sheishet yamim asa Adonai et ha-shamayim v'et haaretz Uvayom hashvi Shabbat vainafash. Okay, God bless the seventh day, made it holy, and we make time holy as well. Sabri. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam borei peri agafen. Amen. Hamotzi.
Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech olam homotzi lehem min haaretz.
Amen. Good Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining in. I can't tell you how much it means to know that you're out there and you're joining us by bringing us into your home and bringing your home into us. So Shabbat Shalom, may we be blessed with health and peace. Lehitrot until we see each other